So everybody with their birth order or with their mother, like their sister better or that we had enough. But we didn't have enough, or we had too much. Or we lived in the north. We lived in the south. I'm too tall. I'm too short. I've got too much hair. I don't have enough hair. It's falling out. It's not falling out. Whatever it is, we all have these excuses. I call all of these things that we hang on to and use to keep ourselves from reaching these higher places in our lives the wake. I call it the wake.
The wake comes from a story that I heard Alan Watts tell one time. It was a very powerful story. He said, your life is like a boat and it's heading up the river at, say, 40 knots. As it's going, you are somehow able to metaphorically stand on the stern, the back of the boat, and look down into the water. There goes your life in this direction. You're standing here and you're looking down into the water. You ask yourself these three questions. The first question, what is the wake? What is it? What is this thing that you see? The answer, the wake is the trail that is left behind. That's what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. It's the trail that is left behind. The second question to ask yourself in this little metaphor, what's driving the boat? What's making this thing go in this direction? The answer, the present moment energy that's being generated by the engine and nothing more. That's the only thing that's making the boat go in this direction. In this little scene, this means it's the present moment thoughts that I have and how I am using them that is making my life go in this direction and nothing more. Because the third question is the most important and powerful question. And ever since I heard it, I've always thought about this whenever I have a tendency to look back here and blame something. Is it possible for the wake to drive the boat? That is, can a trail that is left behind make a boat go in this direction? Of course, the answer to that is no, it can't. It's just a trail that is left behind. In that trail, there are an enormous number of things. Every one of us has a wake, and we have a whole lot of stuff in it. One of the problems that we have is that we have a tendency to look at the wake and all of the stuff that's in it to explain why my life isn't working the way I would like it to work. So you can take a look at the experiences of your life. I look at the experiences of my life and the experiences of my life. I spent some years in a series of foster homes. People have said to me, oh, living in a foster home, that must have been terrible. I said, no, it wasn't terrible at all. When you're 6 years old, you don't wake up every day and say, oh my God, I'm living in a foster home. Isn't this awful? Poor me. How come me and nobody else? You don't do that. You don't do that until you're 40. When you're 40 and your life isn't working and you're bankrupt and you're a drug addict and your relationships are all falling apart and your family's leaving you, you say, why is this happening to me? What do you expect from me? I had to live in a foster home. My mother liked my sister better. We were to this. We were to that. So we take a look at all of these things in our wake. I'm not saying here that you shouldn't be in touch with your past and all of the things that are back there. But to use it as excuses for why you can't get where you'd like to get today is something that, if you do that, you will never get to this place that I'm talking about in this program, this place that I call higher awareness, way beyond ordinary human awareness. One of the most powerful lessons that you can ever learn, I had to learn as a young man. My own father was a man who walked away. He left home when I was just a baby. Left my mother, who's sitting right here, 107 years old. Is that, you know, you're not 182 years old and with 3 little boys. All I had ever heard when he walked out about this person that my older brothers told me about, and that when my mother got her family back together again when I was 9 years old and did all that she could to make a family again with all the hardships. This is a man who never made a phone call, who never sent a penny, who spent some time in prison, who was an alcoholic, who died of cirrhosis of the liver at the age of 49 and was buried in a pauper's grave in Biloxi, Mississippi. And it wasn't until I went to his grave and I was able to stand there, and I used to dream about this man and have this enormous hatred for this person whom I had never seen, just based upon what he had done to my own mother and to my brothers and so on, and all of the stories that I had heard and all the research that I had done. And I ended up at his grave 10 years after he had died when I finally found out that he was dead. It was on the 27th of August. It was 1974. And what I did transformed my life. What I did is, I believe I was sent there by God, or whatever you want to call that divine spirit, the divine presence. And my life at that time wasn't working. I was overweight, my relationships weren't working, my writing wasn't working. There were a lot of things that weren't going well for me in my life at that time. Not badly, but they weren't going at the level that I knew I was capable of getting to because I was filled with this hatred, this anger, this bitterness. And so what I did is I stood there on his grave, on this little marker in the ground, and I said, from now on, I send you love, I forgive you. Mark Twain said that forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And once I let go of that anger and that hatred and all of my attachment to the bonding that I had done with these wounds and let go of that and cleared that out of my life, my writing began to take place at a much higher level. In fact, I wrote Erroneous Zones in a very, very short time after that. I began to get myself back in shape. I began to eat better. I began exercising, got my weight down. And the people that were supposed to come into my life, like my beautiful wife who sits here with me this evening and all of our children, some of whom are here this evening, all of it was allowed to flow when I released that energy of negativity and blame and hatred. They say that you never die from a snake bite. It isn't the bite and you can't be unbitten. It's in the wake. What kills you is the venom that continues to pour through you long after the bite has taken place. And that's something we have control over and we can't change. And I'd like to suggest that what happens is that many of us bond ourselves to these wounds of our past. If I were to cut my hand, just cut it and watch it. My nature says flows up the wound and I just have to watch it, and there's no doctor out there. There's no medicine out there that's going to heal that wound. There's a healing stream that I am connected to that will allow that wound to heal. So my nature says, close up the wounds, don't bond to them, don't hang on to them, close them up. But supposing I say to myself, oh no, you don't. There's no way I'm going to let you close up. You see if I can keep you open and I can go to you and say, look at this. Say what happened. Well, look at this cut. I've got, oh, you poor thing. Look at that. It seems to be getting worse. It's getting infected. Isn't that terrible? And if you practice this kind of a mentality when your nature says close up the wound, but you keep it open, before long you lose your hand, and after that you'll lose your arm, and the whole organism will be destroyed if you don't let your nature take over. And your nature also says, close up the wounds of your past, close them up, and oftentimes we ignore our nature. I had a great teacher that came into my life through his writing. His name was Nisargadatta Maharaja, lived in India up until the mid-1980s, and he wrote something called I Am That, which was very powerful and influential in my life. And one of the things that he talked about when he was asked the question, what's the difference between, say, a saint or a highly functioning human being, a spiritual master, a spiritual teacher, and the rest of us, is that they have unconditional love in them and you don't or we don't. And he said, no, he said saints have unconditional love in them, and so do you. He said the difference between ordinary human awareness and higher awareness people is that they have nothing else inside of them. That's all they have. And it's almost like we have to learn how to get that in ourselves to be able to. Well, I always like to use a metaphor of an orange. I love the orange. Perhaps living in Florida is why, but an orange is a simple metaphor. You take this orange and you squeeze it as hard as you can squeeze it, and you ask yourself what will come out. And what comes out when you squeeze an orange? Orange juice. Never, no matter how many times you squeeze it, will apple juice come out. There's no mistakes. You'll never get grapefruit juice out of this thing ever. The only thing you'll ever get out of it is orange juice. And the next question is why? Why wouldn't you squeeze an orange as hard as you can squeeze it? Does orange juice come out? And I asked that question up in Toronto one time. This little girl sitting right in the front row, she said, that's dumb. She said, that's what's inside. It has to come out. I said, well, that's the answer. You are really smart. And she smiled. She thought that was great. But that's the truth. The reason that orange juice comes out when you squeeze is because that's what's inside. Now you extend the metaphor and someone squeezes you. That is, someone says something about you that you don't like. Someone behaves towards you in a way that you find offensive. Somebody does something or says something to you that you feel hurt by, and out of you comes anger, hatred, bitterness, tension, fear, anxiety, stress. And immediately you say, the reason that comes out of me is because of how he said it, or the way that she said that, or because they did that. But the truth is, the reality is that what comes out is what's inside. And if you don't like what's inside, you can change it. Now, if you ask me how does orange juice get inside of an orange, I would say, I don't know. I can't figure it out. That's a mystery to me. I just enjoy the oranges of my life and give God the credit for that. A lot of people think that other things make them the way they are. They will blame their past, they'll blame their parents, they'll blame the economy, they'll blame the Ayatollah, they'll blame somebody for things that are going wrong in their life. And one of the favorite things that we have to blame for why I'm upset at a particular moment is something called traffic. Traffic made me upset, and I've always reminded myself when I'm in a jam or when I'm on the freeway and I'm trying to get someplace, the traffic doesn't care that you have within you the opportunity in this moment to really work on these things that are perhaps debilitating or creating anxiety or stress in your life. That these are tests, these are opportunities for you. Traffic doesn't care. Your anger is your choice, and you can always choose to be happy, angry, depressed, miserable, upset, or you can choose to be fulfilled and do something positive in this moment. It's always up to you. I'd like to give you what I think of as the great spiritual teachings of many various persuasions. There's a story that summarizes it. It's the story of what I call the 4 philanthropists in a village. The conquerors had come through and they had taken all of the men, or many of the men who were warriors at the time, and they had placed them into this prisoner of war camp right in the village. And many of the villagers knew that their compatriots were imprisoned, and the first philanthropist was a person who had great wealth, and he went to the people who had the prison and were in charge of it, and he said to them, I understand the men are not able to have fresh water and cold water. I would like to donate all of my earnings and everything that I have to purifying the water for them and making sure that all of them will not be sick. And he was granted that, and he felt like he had fulfilled his destiny, that he had done what he was here for. The second philanthropist discovered that the men were sleeping on rocks and that they were cold at night. They didn't have blankets. And he took all of his funds and he said to them, I would like to provide bedding and blankets for the people so that they will be comfortable when they sleep at night. And he was granted that, right? And he donated his money for this purpose. And again, he felt that he was fulfilling his destiny. The third philanthropist discovered that the food that they were eating was inadequate, that they were just given beans and water and some bread. And so he said, I own a farm and I'd like to grow all of my food and I'd like to take this food to all of these prisoners. And he was granted that right. And all 3 of these great philanthropists in the village felt that they had really completed their mission for why they were here. But the 4th philanthropist was a saint. He was living not at ordinary human awareness, but at higher consciousness levels. And he went and he found out where the keys were, and he went to the prison at night and he released all of the prisoners. And this little metaphorical story really tells us that when we are living at ordinary human awareness, there's nothing wrong with those who are out there who can help us to suffer and comfort, all right? And many of us have learned to do that and accept that and say, all right, as long as I'm comfortable, even if I'm suffering, it's okay. But there are those who have keys, and those keys can open the prisons. One of the great teachers in my life was Carlos Castaneda, and Castaneda talked about his teacher, who was what they call inaugural, and a Native American term that refers to all that is knowable. And his teacher told him that your life is like being born into a room, a mansion, if you will, that has 1,000 rooms, but you're born into one room, and this one room is called daily human awareness. And the only way you can get in is through conception.